Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Afternoon Intersections, where we connect God's Word to everyday life.
Good afternoon. I almost said good evening there, but good afternoon, everyone. Happy Sabbath. So glad that you joined us this afternoon for another edition of Afternoon Intersections. We're excited to dig deeper into God's Word today and hear what He has to say. I want to welcome our guests for today. I want to begin by bringing on our panelist coordinators, Elders Lamont and Donna Tucker. They're here with us today. We want to welcome their frequent guests with us. We also want to bring on for the first time with us today, Pastor Eric Peters. All right. He is a children's ministry and youth pastor. And so we're so glad that he's here with us today. And of course, we want to bring on with us for the first time today, Dr. Cleveland Hauser. He is a active individual in prison ministry for the North American Division. He's a retired pastor, chaplain. And so we're just so glad to have him with us and all of our guests with us on today. For those of you who are watching and you want to be able to add a comment or ask a question, we want you to know that you can do so by dialing 615 area code 686-2933. Again, that number is 615-686 2933. If you want to weigh in and share any questions or comments that you want to add to our conversation. As you know, we officially or unofficially have a name. We're going to call our panel Afternoon Intersections, and the idea is to bridge the, I wouldn't say a divide, but where the Word of God meets everyday living. We want to see how it relates to our life. And so, a lot of our conversation today is a reflection of what was shared, the message entitled today, How to Be a Great Leader. And it's centered on the Gospel of Matthew, particularly Jesus' teaching in Matthew 5, when he talks about loving your enemies and what that means. And so we're going to kind of jump right into it in terms of our conversation today on how to be a great lover as Jesus has defined for us. And so I want to begin by asking this question then to our panelists who would like to weigh in and go first. But the first thing is, how is love usually defined, right? This time of year, it's Valentine's Day. Everybody is, buying candy or getting gifts or thinking about, being with somebody in a significant relationship. And so we want to ask the question that, how is love usually defined in our culture today? Particularly in our movies and our television shows and music. And how do you think that this definition has impacted our view of love in our relationships? So we want to begin then. How do you think love is defined in our culture today?
Pastor, we see it a lot in movies and in a lot of the music that's out nowadays. It's sexual intimacy defines what love is. And it's really skewed the holiness of what love is supposed to be, because it's used through sex. I mean, sex is the method in which people get to know each other, to sustain the relationship, to make up if you're angry with one another. And it's I believe the devil has done a great job in doing a disservice in what God had originally intended for sexual intimacy to be.
Yeah. So we see that in our culture, even the idea of sex. I think about it. Sex is viewed as something not to be even talked about, when really it's celebrated. God created sex. And so our culture has really skewed our understanding of what love is and what sexual intimacy is. Look at Pastor Peters wants to weigh in.
Sure. So to add on to that, I definitely agree 100%. But it's also like a fairy tale. Our movies, they try to make love a selfish fairy tale situation, where if it's not exactly how you want it, if it's not doing exactly what you want, then it's not right. They should, cater to everything you do. They should do they should never question you. They should never do anything. It should be perfect, or you should be out of that love situation. So it's a selfish love that this world promotes as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that with the Hallmark movie. You see these Hallmark movies, and when the Hallmark movies, and it's always this romantic love. Oh, it's all flowers, and let's walk off into the sunset, and it's all selfish. It's, well, what's going to benefit me? What's going to benefit my situation? So in being romantic, it's still selfish. It's still being beneficial to me, to that person.
Yeah. So yeah. Go ahead. I know, but I'm getting there's some feedback in some of our background.
Can you hear me clear?
I can hear you, Elder, but I'm getting some feedback that I'm getting some messages about. So I don't know if you guys can check if you're having your screens open so that we don't have that additional background going on. Go ahead, Dr. Hauser.
I would kind of concur what has been said. I know that media exposure presents a falsified concept of what love is. I see a couple of things happening. One, I see what I call how the media presents love and how the culture grabs it. It seems to be narcissistically self-centered, where it's all about what I can get out of it, how my emotional needs can be met, and and forget about whatever anybody else feels, as long as I'm satisfied. Mm-hmm. And then I see it being eros centric, and that is where, as it has been said, where sex become the predominant thing in what they call the expression of love, and the concept that a lot of young people get into is that, let me prove my love to you, and it's simply sexually based. Now, the word eros, which is a Greek word, in the very beginning, Sophocles said that what eros meant was to have a terrific belonging. As time went on, this word got tainted, and that's how the sexual connotation came in, and so it kind of perverted everything. But when we look back at it, we definitely have to conclude that the media, the TV, the movies, the music, all presents a falsified concept of what love is. And the only way that love becomes true is that there has to be that connection with the one who is love, and that's God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that, Elder. And so how do you think that the media, our culture, how has that impacted us? I mean, think about our own relationships, right? Even me, when I think about when I get married, you hear this thing, you get married and a lot of movies, and they lived happily ever after, right? Nothing bad will ever happen now that you found this person, no conflict, no difficulty, no trial, and we all know that that's not real, right? And so how do you think these images, some of these things impact us in terms of even our relationships and marriages with other people? How has that shaped us in some ways? Go ahead. Go ahead, Elder Tucker, and then Pastor Peters.
Well, I mean, it's like advertising. They advertise for a certain thing, and subliminally, I guess they're trying to get you to realize something, and you get so desensitized to it that you really think that what you see on TV and what you see in the movies and things like that is how it should be. And so in your marriage or in your everyday life or living or whatever, you're looking for that. And when you don't get it and it doesn't happen that way, then you're very disappointed, you're very upset, or you're thinking the other person is the problem. And, it's your misconception and not, of not really knowing what love, know what love is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Pastor Peters. Thank you for that. Go ahead. That was a good comment there.
I almost feel like it's created a video game environment around relationships. If you're, for instance, you're playing, I'll take it back, Mario Brothers. You're running through, bouncing, jumping. As you're doing well, it's great. You keep moving through levels. When you die, you reset. If you get to a point where you're going to die, we just reset it and start over. And so that's kind of what we do in relationships when we look at it as the world views it. As long as it's going good and we're progressing along, we're happy. But once we get into a difficult point, then we want to press reset. We want to get divorced. We want to start over, find somebody else. And I think that's kind of how it's desensitizing us these days.
Yeah. That popular view of love causes us, when things happen unexpected, to say, well, maybe this wasn't the person for me. Maybe God didn't put us together. Maybe there's somebody else. We want to start over. What about in terms of beyond the marriage relationship? How do you think this impacts just how we relate to people, our neighbors, our co-workers, fellow members? Do we think that this has also tainted our views? Do we see similar ways of relating even in the marriage relationship with our people that we know? Go ahead, Donna.
It's very superficial, and it's still very narcissistic. Those who, if my neighbors leave me alone or if they treat me well, then I can love them. But if they're a little bit loud or if their lawn is a little unkept, then it's the strained relationship, and so
they're flying the Confederate flag,
right?
Yeah. So even those people, we see people as other or enemies, not people to love, right? What do you think? Did you want to weigh in on that, Hauser?
Well, it shows your connection point. So who are you connected with? As how you treat your neighbors. If you're really connected with God and you have that love, it's going to flow over. And as Donna said, you're not going to curse anybody out. You're not going to want to hit somebody on the head or speak your mind, as they say. But that love that comes from Christ, because you're connected with him, is going to determine how you treat your neighbors, how you speak to them, how you care for them. It all comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we kind of touched on this a little bit too, this idea of the difference between romantic love and holy love, right? And so we see, there's a difference there, particularly the holy love we see demonstrated on the cross, right? So romantic love is this notion that a lot of time is based on how we feel, how the person makes us feel. But we see holy love on the cross is not based on any of those things, right? And so how does having an understanding of holy love, true love then, how does that impact how we relate to each other, particularly now, our enemies? Is Christ calling us to this kind of love? Any thoughts on it?
Well, I would think with romantic love is discriminatory. I would think that holy love is non-discriminatory. Christ is saying, really, I don't care what you have done. I don't care what your situation is. No, I'm gonna love you anyway. And I've seen people like that. I've met people like that who I've said myself that I really don't care what he does. I'm going to still love him. I learned how to do that working in corrections. That you love the men who have made mistakes, regardless of what they have done. So this non-discriminatory love that depicts holy love is what we call an in spite of love, because it was commended to us while we were yet sinners. And when Christ was developing the plan of salvation, I know he looked all the way down to Nashville and saw me. And in that non-discriminatory love, he was saying that, Cleve, I will love you anyway. I know that sometimes you get rambunctious, sometimes you get rebellious, sometimes you just plain old rotten. But I'm still going to love you. Anyway, that's that in spite of love. So there is nothing actually wrong with romantic love being discriminatory because you have to, because it's between the two. So when it's non-discriminatory in the sense that you want it allows you to bring somebody else into the relationship as far as romance, and romance is between the two partners. But in order for romantic love to be what it should be, it has to connect with holy love. True romantic love cannot exist on any type of permanent basis without it being connected to that holy love that comes from Christ. And that holy love, as you mentioned in your sermon, it was expressed on Calvary. And when Jesus took it all the way, not on to Calvary, he took it to the grave. And on resurrection morning, he got up and snatched the keys of hell and death out of the enemy's hand and went on to glory. And in the pavilion where he stands before us, before the Father, that love that he has for us, that holy love, is there for us. And when God looks at us, he really don't look at us, he looks at Jesus, because he is the epitome of love for us.
Okay, so I got a question here, right? Go ahead, Pastor Peters, if you want to weigh in. And then someone just sent in a question saying, is he saying we can have holy romantic love? I think so. Elder Hauser, the Greek makes a distinction between romantic love and agape love, right? And so I think the highest form of love that Scripture teaches is agape love, that does include feelings and emotions and affections, right? That causes you to actually engage a person beyond when, in the same way, even when those feelings or emotions are gone. Like I tell people when they get married, like, when you first fall in love with somebody, they say your body literally produces a chemical called endorphins, right? And some of them, they last for 6 months. If you're lucky, they may last for 2 years. During that time, you'll climb a mountain. You'll tell your spouse, I'll bring you the moon, right? And then, and you really mean that. If you could, you would fly to the moon and get it and bring it back to them, right? Because that's how that feeling is there, right? Chemically. But then there comes a point when that goes away, right? And then you see the person's flaws. You see things that were so cute, they're not so cute anymore. Things that weren't such a big deal, it's a real big deal now. And that's when people start thinking, oh, am I really in love with do I really love this person? They start questioning that. And I think that's where I think God allows that to now move us to another more deeper form of love. That's agape love, because now that becomes something more than a feeling, but a commitment that we do that still has that same essence of that. And so I think it embodies it. I don't think we should necessarily their distinctions, but I think holy love encapsulates all of those, but in an even more deeper, more profound way, as we see Jesus demonstrating on the cross. I don't know if anybody can add to that. Look like Pastor Peters, you were trying to say something. If you do, go ahead.
No, I was definitely agreeing with you. That is definitely on point. It's an unconditional love, and that definition of that relationship, a marriage, is exactly it. When you start off, it, like you said, you'll fly to the moon if you have to, but that unconditional love is what keeps you going when those odd things come about, when things are a little bit more difficult than you thought they were gonna be. And so when you have an unconditional love, it allows you to see that your partner or whoever that unconditional love is for is God's child. And it's like when I'm in the text in Matthew 5, when he talks about how when he goes through and he says, loving your enemies, for me, when I hear that, it's almost like oxymoron. It's almost like Jesus is telling a joke. He's like, look, I need you to love your enemies. And these Pharisees and Sadducees are like, what? Love my enemies? How does that even look? And it's like he's almost saying, look, you're a Red Sox fan. I need you to be a Yankee fan too. You're like, wait, that doesn't even go together. That's not possible. And it's like, he's like, I know, but you can do it if you seek me. And it's like it almost goes back to the text. All things are possible through Christ. So if you want to love your enemies, you look at it and say that's impossible. I look at it and say you can do all things if you just believe and you trust in me. And that's what I get out of that.
Yeah. I think Dr. Hauser was weighing in, and then Elder Donna. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to kind of go back to the question that was proposed by the audience, and being in conjunction with what you have already said, that in romantic love, it actually encapsulates all three of the Greek descriptions of love. It has phileo, it has eros, and it has agape. It's all of that is in that. And Barclay says that the phileo love is the warmest type of love because it is a friendship, and it is the sharing, it is the experiential type of love that goes along with the eros or sexually engagement or in agape, the kind of love that's based on a principle and not so much on an emotion. But all of it is within each one of us who are in, especially us who are on the screen, who are married. There is that romantic type of love, which all of these things are included in, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. Elder Donna Tucker.
I think that why it's so difficult to love your enemies is because romantic love is a give and take. And I think the best display of love and how Jesus loves us and how we should love our enemies is Hosea and Gomer. You know, with romantic love, you expect something back. I expect my spouse not to hurt me. I expect my spouse to be participatory in this relationship. I expect, and for, your enemy or even a neighbor that literally where we live may have a Confederate flag hanging from their doorstep, and knowing what that represents, I shouldn't expect that person to love me. It can't be a give and take. I have to love that person regardless, and let the Holy Spirit do the work in them for however they may feel about me as a people's, in general. Because we do have a neighbor who has one of those flags, and up until this point, they just put this flag up, but up until this point, they have been very kind. They have shared things from their garden. They have always bought the things when my boys went over to sell stuff for the school. They've always bought things. And then when this flag goes up, we're like, yeah, but nothing has changed. Mm-hmm. We've seen how they've been up to this point, but now this flag is giving us a different perception of them when they've actually showed us, at least in part, who they are. And the Jesus is saying the rest doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. And it's difficult because we want them to feel towards us, how we're supposed to feel towards them. But if we truly love them, it would be unconditional.
Yeah, which really, I appreciate for that, because that kind of leads to, really this question of why do we find it so difficult to love our enemies, right? And, our enemies are not just people who wave Confederate flags, right? Or at least we don't feel that way, but it could be a lot of different people, different scenarios, right? And why do we feel that? Why is that often so difficult? And so we know in the context of that, Matthew, in Israel, there were some people it was okay not to love, right? Based on race, based on, if they weren't of a Jewish religion, that they could actually hate them, disregard them. This was kind of a collective consensus. And so they really didn't think that God expected them to do that they're the enemies of God. This idea that, well, God is going to judge all these unbelievers, right? So therefore it's okay to hate them, right? And so why is it, Jesus kind of is redefining that, why is that so difficult in different scenarios? Why do we have such a hard time doing that? And then I want to bring on, while you're pondering that question, Sister Arlinda Stewart, who is also joining us for our conversation. Sister Stewart, we want to welcome you in as well as a part of our panel. And so we're asking the question here now, this notion of why is it so difficult to love people, our enemies, people who are against us,
Well, first of all, I think we go with our first thoughts and our first feelings because we disagree with things that they do before we think about the whole situation of who we are. And then we may think about it later after the fact, but in truly we should think about that at first, of why they're not like us, but we're not supposed to judge or treat them any differently. You're muted, Pastor.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Sister Stewart. Anybody else like to weigh in?
I'm sure.
Go ahead.
Do you think that maybe it's a protection mechanism for us? The reason that we can't love our enemies, or we're scared of our feelings getting hurt, their opinions may be different from ours, and so we conclude by forming a perception of how a person is or might be, instead of just loving the person regardless. And so loving your enemies really is not about shining any apples or washing any cars or going to the store and buying some groceries and sitting on their doorsteps. It's simply just treating a person with kindness and respect the same way that Jesus would do it. And to me, that's the concept of loving your enemies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think you touched on something there too. Sometimes we're feared they're going to reject us. Maybe we had some conflict with them before. We don't know how they're going to respond if we come to them. Or we might just have a fear of rejection, period. It's self-preservation. So sometimes we just want to protect ourselves from hurt. We don't want to take the risk. Sometimes, to love somebody in the way that Jesus loved, and we see it on the cross, it took a risk. He was rejected by and large by everybody in that moment. Yeah. So it's like, and that's hurtful. And we see him going through that anxiety, even on his way to the cross and on the cross, right? So this is not something, easy, which is going to lead us to another point here. It's like, this is the one thing that we cannot do without Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Is love your enemies. You know what I mean? There's a whole lot of stuff you can do in the church. And you don't have to have this love in your heart. This is the one thing that requires Jesus in order to love. Which really, when you think about it too, I'm going to jump ahead of myself, is this notion of, there are a lot of social organizations out there. There are a lot of social justice things that are happening out there. You can do a whole lot of stuff without the love of Jesus in your heart, and even ministry in the church, and not have love in your heart. Anybody else? Anybody? I see a couple of hands. I think Brother Donna wanted to weigh in.
There's Lamont.
Oh, Lamont.
Well, you kind of touched on what I was going to say. A lot of times when we think about love or our enemies, they may have said something to us or about us to someone, and two things happen. Either you fight or you flight. And if you're going to fight, which sometimes is the first inclination with our humanity, is to, well, I'm going to get that person, or sometimes you withdraw, and it's like, well, I'll just love them from afar. And that is really dangerous, because I've done it many times. Well, that person, they embarrass me or they hurt me or whatever, but God tells me I have to love my enemy, so I'm just going to love them from afar. And that's not what he would have us to do. So until I realized that, and just being personal, then I moved from love them from afar to, well, I'm just gonna be overly polite to them, be overly nice to them, But then that's me being spiteful. That's me being hateful. So I had to re-examine myself and realize that I truly can love this person who has wronged me through God. And it has to be a godly thing, and it has to be something intentional for me to actually, because my personality is not naturally to love somebody that hurts me. Just from my background, from my environment of growing up, that wasn't. So it's been something that I've had to, and I love that you talked about this week, because there's something that, as Donna was saying, our neighbor of 20 years just put up a flag just this summer, with all the unrest that was going on. So we tend to, my first thought was to look at them different, but then now it's like, hey, Greg, how you doing, man? What's up? And I try to hold a conversation. I know his wife comes home at 3:30 every evening, and she backs in and checks the mailbox. So I make it a point to be around that time, so that I can speak to them and show them that just because you put up a flag and tensions are a little bit different in the neighborhood, we still love you, and we're going to love you as God would have us love you. And so that's just something that is not, well, that's my point. I just got
yeah. So hey, Pastor Peters.
Yeah, I think self-preservation and ego a lot of times keep us from loving our enemies. Because if I love you, then I have to be vulnerable. I've got to be perceived as weak in our society. So that person that's doing you wrong, you're going to still allow them to do X, Y, and Z. You're still going to love that person. That person spit in your face, and you're still going to be kind to them. That person slapped you, and you're still going to allow. And I think it's ego kicks in, and it's like, you're not going to treat me worse than I treat you, or, I've got to get the upper hand. Just for a moment, it takes me back to that parable where Jesus talks about allowing, having the people work in the vineyard, and each person comes in and they work, and at the end he's paying everybody. And the people who got paid last are mad because they're like, wait, that's not fair to us. We worked all day, even though their wage was a valid wage for what they did. Their ego was like, wait, that's not fair that they only worked 10 minutes and they got the same reward I do. So a lot of times our egos stand in the way of us being able to love somebody and especially our enemies.
Yeah, I think that is such a powerful point too, because, and our whole culture tells us it's weak if you forgive that person. You know what I'm saying? They need to be held a certain way. And which really makes me think about Jesus said this idea of, the humility of a child is what we need, right? Everyone should have a childlike humility. So the ability to forgive and to love is a disposition, right? That only he can do in us, because everything about us says, no, I am not going to love this person who has hurt me this way. And so that's a major role as well. Thank you for sharing that. I want to kind of, what also kind of struck me and what's always struck me is 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul talks about, you can have all knowledge, have not love. You can give away everything you have to the poor and have not love. You can even die as a martyr, right? And have not love. And so why do you think then it is so easy for us as believers to really spend a lot of time focusing on all of those things, knowledge, service, and even die for our faith, but kind of put this off to the side, And how is it that we're able to do that without this piece? Why do you think that's, and what does that mean that we do that?
I think in some ways it kind of gives us makes it easy. We think it makes it easier. Well, look what I'm doing. Look what I have done. And, in our minds, I guess it makes us feel like we're doing it. But what good is it when we go home and we're cussing a person or mad about whatever we've done, because, well, I guess it goes back to checking the box. Remember when we were talking about, certain things you do and you check the box. Okay, I did that. Okay, I was nice to this person. Okay, I did. But was your heart in it? Was God's love in it when you did it?
And I think what's stressed is what's been stressed in the organization itself. When people, even when you meet people, I remember before we got married, and I was dating somebody, and my great uncle wanted to know, what is your name? What is your last name? What church does your family go to? Who are they related to? He wanted to know the lineage. How do you fit in? And, we as Seventh-day Adventists are very into, how many degrees does a person have? Where did you go to school? Did you go to Oakwood or did you go to Southern Baptist or whatever? And we make all of these things important. Can you stand up in front of everybody and pray for 10 minutes? Or, do you just have a very humble 30-second prayer? We highlight things that are not important. And so everybody just kind of falls in line. Well, if this is what's important and this is what's stressed, these are the things that I need to work on and need to do versus just show the love of Christ.
Yeah. So I'm getting a couple comments, questions. I want to read some of them and we can try to see if we can do our best to answer them. So the first one here is, and it's anonymous. I too, like Elder Tucker, commented, overcompensate kindness to my enemies. I've learned that in the end, I am deceived to think that there's virtue in my good works. And it's a false kind of loving my enemies because I never dealt with my heart and the real reason why I do not love them. The real reason why I do not love them, right? So you kind of hear what's being said. So there's a sense in which what I'm taking away from this question is that there's a false love that we can be nice to people. We call, you hear it, the nice nasty. I'll be cordial to you. I'll smile, even smile at you when you walk in the room. You know what I'm saying? And say happy Sabbath. You know what I'm saying? When you come around. But it will be so chilly and cold. We know that the conversation doesn't go beyond that, right? And so there's a way in which, and we kind of justify that, but it never really causes us. And I think it goes to this idea of ego, because you can do that without ever having to humble yourself. You don't have to go and deal with the heart of the problem. So for example, what you said, how you said it, made me feel insignificant. You know what I mean? So to confront this issue now, I have to tell you that you made me feel this small, right? So I'd rather not tell you that. So I'm just going to smile. I'm gonna do the nice nasty, right? So there's a way in which that we don't engage in really dealing with loving people, because it's gonna make us vulnerable. Even when I think about, when my wife and I have disagreements, and they're always so rare. No, I'm joking, but when we have a disagreement, it takes a lot for me to come back and say, I was wrong about this, to humble myself and acknowledge that. It takes, it's a humbling that we fight with this ego, to overcome. And we see that it really doesn't allow us to deal with that. I don't know if anybody else want to weigh in on that. I want to share a couple other questions. Go ahead, Arlen.
Yeah, that's easy to do. But at the same time, you find yourself trying to find out, am I? It takes time. Because I remember being like that, but then I remember stop being like that. and asking myself, do I really, want this on my heart that I did not forgive this person? Or did I not go to them and, and change my way? Because what people do to you, even your enemy, it will change you and making you like them if you're not careful. Because it's just like, if it's not in your heart to, when you go out to feed the homeless, or I go out and feed the homeless, and you see people that are not like you, or they're coming at you because some of them mind not right, or they're not dressed right or something, and you say, well, and then you have a reaction and you want to move out the way and treat them differently. And you can't do that. Well, and when you do that, before they come to you, you almost have to fix your heart and your mind that this person is you're a step away from being like this person. But it takes thought. It takes thought before you're in that situation to be able to change your heart and forgive, a person or something that happened. Because it's like a situation I experienced yesterday at work. There was a little girl that would come in. And I asked her what was she doing, and she automatically had attitude. And and I told her, I said, well, what is your name? And she told me her name. I forgot what it was. But I'm gonna say Sheila. And I said, okay, Sheila, I just, I said, I'm not your enemy. I'm here to help you. I said, I just need to know what everybody's doing, and so, and I asked her another question. She just pointed at the boy, and I said, okay, just talk to me. I said, speak to me, and then she spoke to me. So in the background, I kind of felt that what I would do, what I would do, or, say something to her right away and be smart with her, but I didn't. I went and I reported her told the supervisor about it. She's new, and we have one, that's got attitude, but, I said, but she's okay. I said, don't say anything to her. I just want to let you know what happened. So later on that day, I continued to be nice to her. And try to help her. And she still kept me at a length, but, and I just laughed, but it made me feel good that I was still trying to be nice to her.
Yeah. No, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Yes.
Go ahead, Elder. How's it?
So I think sometimes, in dealing with your enemies and loving them, we have to drop facades, and these facades that serve as a protection mechanism for us. And sometimes I wonder with us, even as a church, I wonder if we come through the door with a facade, because there are certain people in church that we don't like, we don't want to speak to. If they come down the center aisle, we go to the outside aisle to keep from speaking to them. So sometimes I think this whole concept when we come in and happy Sabbath, and sometimes I think that's a facade, because I'm not really sure whether the person is really happy, but I don't have the intelligence to make that judgment call, because that's God's call. But I think that in order for us to love our enemies, in order for us to love our family, in order for us to love our wives, all of these facades have to be dropped in order that we might express the true love of God toward others.
It's interesting you say that, right? This idea of facades have to be dropped. And so let's think about what we emphasize as just broadly as a church, just across Christian denominational lines, right? So you are a good Christian if you do what? If you engage in outreach evangelism, right? You're a good Christian if you believe a certain way, particularly Adventist Church, if you believe in the 7-day Sabbath, right? Or you are a good Christian if you are a faithful tither, right? Or you come regularly, right? And so we have made these things, external things, the sign of Christian maturity, when Jesus makes love the sign of maturity. And in order to love, there must be vulnerability. So does our church culture encourage vulnerability? If I say, how are you today? And I say, I'm not doing too well, and I had somebody try to trick me like that one time. I said, how you doing? And they said, I'm not doing too well, because they were trying to see, was I really listening to what they were saying? I said, oh, you're not doing too well. We zoned in on that. So I wonder, is there a sense in which this ability to love and to put down facade, is it also a part of what we celebrate and commemorate? Do we commemorate and celebrate loving each other sacrificially? Is this like a core fundamental value of church life, being more loving? Or is it, or is it something else? Is that part of the challenge and the dilemma that we're facing with this authenticity?
Well, I definitely
Go ahead.
I definitely think it's part of the challenge.
Mhm.
And I won't just say Seventh-day Adventism, Adventist, but Christianity as a whole. It's like the push is, if you are a Christian, then life is good. Everything's supposed to be great. You accepted Christ. You're supposed to check your bank account and there's millions there. You're supposed to get that new job. You're supposed to have that prosperity. Everything is supposed to be great because you are a Christian. And a lot of times people don't want you to see that things aren't great. I'll be transparent. I was at Patmos, and when I started working at Patmos, I actually was putting so much time into Patmos that I was neglecting Apple. And I actually lost my job at Apple. And so I talked to, the pastor there and some different things. And at church, he was giving an appeal, and he shared that there are people who have lost their jobs and this, that, and the other. And if you've lost your job or something's going on, stand up. And my ego would not let me stand up. I knew I just lost my job. I knew that I didn't know where the money was coming from to pay my mortgage. I was like, okay, I refuse to stand up and allow people to look at me as less than, because we're Adventists. We're supposed to have doctorates. We're supposed to have money. And so it took my wife standing up for me to finally realize that, okay, listen, this is about, he's trying to show love to you, and you're not accepting it because your ego is so weak. You're so stuck up on yourself that you can't accept love from somebody else because you don't want to be viewed as something less than. And the amazing thing is, once I stood up and I allowed myself to be vulnerable, members of the church had just started walking up, just putting things in my hand. God gave us that day the amount of money that we needed to cover everything. And it's like, I almost let my ego stand in the way of receiving God's blessing. And I think a lot of time we focus on not being viewed as weaker or less than.
Yeah. That is so true. That is so true. Go ahead.
I think that we forget that the church is a hospital. When we go to the hospital, the actual hospital, we're not judging people for being there, for being sick, because they're there. But when we are at church, the spiritual hospital, we have not made that a safe place to be vulnerable. Because if someone stands up and gives their testimony, there is a risk of judgment, and instead of seeing what God has done, oh, you used to do that, and then and when you were describing the look of what it means to be a good Christian, I kind of chuckled to myself, because when I got when I was asked to be an elder, I was like, who, me? I am not an elder. I'm not an elder, and so we have created these checklists of what is and what isn't, and how things should be, when if God calls who he calls, and they may not look how we think that they're going to look, and we need to, as a church body, have the love of Christ enough to embrace it. And I think why it's so difficult for people to comprehend Christ's love is because human love hurts. And spiritual love, it hurt Christ, but he never hurt us. He took on all that hurt so we wouldn't have to hurt, but because of past experiences, and we relate, the more we open up ourselves to be vulnerable, the more open we are to being hurt. And we can't differentiate that hurt between spiritual hurt. And so that is the kind of love that we show. We still show hurt.
Yeah. That you're saying a lot there. I want to try to get to a couple of these questions before we wrap up, see if we can do our best to answer some of these questions. As Christians, should we fake the love to one another and hope it becomes real? Or is our lack of bringing it to him a sign of our unbelief? Anybody want to respond to that one? We'll take one response because we have a couple more questions. We'll take one response to that. Anybody want to respond to that? Should we fake the love? As Christians, should we fake the love to one another and hope it becomes real? Or is our lack of bringing it to him a sign of our unbelief? Should we fake it?
I like what the last person said. If it can't be genuine and authentic, then we need to examine ourselves, our hearts, and ask ourselves why. I don't think it should be fake, because if something happens to trigger you and then your real you comes out, then that could have a more adverse response than if you just say, Lord, please give me the authenticity to love this person genuinely.
Yeah. I think it's really a matter of prayer. I hear, what is the solution to lovelessness, right? God is love, right? Getting in the presence of God, getting to know him. That kind of love has to come in humility and surrender to him in relationship with him. That's not something that we can conjure up in and of our own. And so I do think sometimes we don't experience this deep love with other people because we don't really believe it's possible. We don't really, or we don't want to believe it's possible. We don't really believe that love can really come in my heart and for me to love somebody. So I think that some level, our inability to love in this way is a level of unbelief, right? It's an unbelief or a lack of experience of God's love. Have we ourselves truly experienced the love of God? Because when we experience it, and how real are we with our true selves? You know what I mean? And to receive God's love, I think that as we come to God in those ways, I think it brings about this transformation of heart. Another question, and I still got a couple more, right? I'm trying to get to them. We'll take one from you guys, and I'll try to weigh in. What advice do you have for non-confrontational people who need to address their enemies? So if you're non-confrontational, you don't like conflict, but you have enemies, what do you need to do? Any thoughts on that? Anybody want to weigh in on that?
I think
I like to hear that because I'm non-confrontational.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess first of all, you'd have to pray about it. And when you don't want to go to your enemy, been in that situation, sometimes it changes who you need to change who you are and how you do things towards that person if you have the opportunity. And when you do that, when I've done that, then it made me feel good to the point that eventually God will some kind of way bring that person around to you if you truly experience the forgiveness in your heart. You'll get the chance to show that. But at the same time, you have to change your point of view of that person and whatever the situation is, and know that you would do it differently when you're confronted with that person again. But I think it does take a prayer from God and the change of your heart, and that will come back to you to give you that chance to see if you can forgive your enemy.
Yeah. And again, this could be a whole topic in and of itself. I'd like to add to that. I think that there needs to be some level of introspection in this way. So what is it that I'm afraid of in this confrontation? How is this person hurt me, right? Trying to bring those things before God and identifying what is the goal of the confrontation. what is the hurt? What is the root cause, right? And I think that if we can begin, I think part of the issue why we have a hard time dealing with confrontation is because we don't really deal with or communicate what the hurt is, how you have hurt, or what it is that needs to happen. Here's how I feel, right? So I think that coming to a place of understanding what's happening internally, and then what may possibly be happening internally with the other person. You may not know that for sure, but there might be some insecurities that's impacting the way they are relating to you. And then I think you have to ask the Lord to give you the courage to confront. You know what I mean? And know that the courage to know that your entreaty may not be received, and how to deal with that possible level of rejection. So I think those are just a couple of things that could be used for that, right? A couple more questions. Believe me, we got a couple that are here, and we've been on for a while. I don't want to keep us too much longer. How does the panel differentiate between duty and love? And can one act out of duty or the right thing to do and it not be okay? Or how do you know it's duty and not love? You guys understand the question? Let's read one more time. So how does the panel differentiate between duty and love? Right? Is this just a duty or is it love? And can one act out of duty or the right thing to do and it not be okay? So can you still do it? It's the right thing to do, but it not be okay. Or how do you know it's duty and not love? Any thoughts on it?
I'm in a Bible study, and last week we actually talked about works, good works. We kind of broke that down, and I think it just all boils down to motive. Because, we all agreed that you can go out and do things and they look right, but what is your motive? Are you just checking off a list, or are you doing things out of love? Are you, it's when we're converted and we are displaying the love of Christ, then we do things because we want to do them. Like the story that you told in your sermon, this woman received something, and as a result, she wanted to give something. So her motive was pure. And if you're just saying, well, let me go because they expect me to be here, let me do this thing because it looks right, I think that kind of helps to differentiate.
Yeah. My thing is, if I'm doing something and I'm complaining the whole time I'm on the way, it's not out of love. But if I'm doing it and I'm happy to do it, and hey, no matter what it is, then I have a glad heart. Well, then I know I'm doing it out of love. But yeah, if I'm complaining all the way, man, I don't want to go over there, I don't want to do this, I know it's not out of love.
Yeah.
And love should supersede and predicate duty.
Right. I agree. I think they should go together. They should go together, but it depends on your situation. But I think it is our duty to be in a loving manner at all times, but we're not always like that. It depends on the situation. They to me, they kind of go hand in hand, but it's not always like that. They do not stay together.
Yeah. Sometimes, we say we do things and we know it's not because of love. It's on the checklist, and the reality is we have to ask God. There's some things that we don't enjoy, but we got to ask. I think we underestimate prayer in the Christian experience. You know what I mean? Asking God to do something with our heart that we can't do. Lord, make this spring from a heart of love. I do have any other questions or comments. I have one final comment here, and then I'm going to prepare for us to wrap up. And I know you guys have seen a couple comments. This one says here, it is difficult to love enemies because we're taught that love is our feeling instead of love being a principle of God that we express as a part of his character in us, right? So this idea that love is just a feeling and not something, a principle or something that's a reflection of the character of God. Why do you think God makes this idea of loving our enemies the pinnacle of the Christian experience? That this is a sign that you're mature. Why does he make such a big deal about this in Scripture?
I think first of all, I think because that's what he experienced. I mean, he experienced every bit of it. But do we? But we don't go there when that happens to us. I mean, it doesn't. Takes us to think about it first, or to kind of ponder the situation before we think of that. And even after that, do we think about it that way? Do we think about loving some person that comes up and slaps you? You still think about loving that person or forgiving them or just walking away. At times, I've learned that a lot of things are said and done. You can say something in a nice way, but then a lot of times you can just smile or just kind of ignore it and ponder it later in your mind. It really takes practice. It really does for us to have Jesus in us to do exactly what he does. He gave us many, many examples. So, can we do exactly what he has told us to do and showed us? Because he showed us the love of enemies after all the things that they done to him. And he still loved every single person.
I think love is a part of spiritual growth. Love is like a muscle in a sense. It has to be developed. So when you think about when God gave the 10 Commandments, he didn't say do these things. He said, hey, do this, do this, do this, do this. He said first, because I love you, this is how you'll recognize somebody who loves me. They will do this thing, they will do this, they will act this way. And so when you start looking at the commandments, a lot of times we look at them as checklists, but God just goes, hey, if you want to see somebody who's in love with me, look for these characteristics. They won't have another God before me. They won't, take my name in vain. They won't do this. They will keep the Sabbath. They will not steal. They will not kill. These are the characteristics you look for, not check boxes. It's like a relationship. And I, my wife and I talk about this. It's like when you love somebody and you're in them, you have certain characteristics. I treat her family a certain way because I love her. She treats my family a certain way because she loves me. There are characteristics that are developed when you are truly in love with God. And so God goes, let me show you how to do them first. I'm going to show you all the things I'll do for you. Look, I'll do this. I'll provide for you. I'll care for you. I'll do this. Now I ask that as you see and you read and you hear about who I am and my nature, allow me to develop those things in you. So he takes you into that weight room and he gives you the bar first. And he says, see how easy it is to lift the bar? And you start pushing the bar. Then he starts to add weight to develop that love. And the more you allow him to coach you, the more you allow him to be your trainer, the more you'll be able to push and be strong in that characteristic of love.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. One question here: can my love for God cause me to demonstrate for someone else out of duty, but not love for that person? What do you guys think? That's a tough one, right?
Yeah.
I'd say it depends on the stage you are. He may allow you to do something for somebody you don't love quite yet, but it's in the process of growing you. So as he's growing you, he's like, you are going to give that money to that person who acts and you don't want to. So it just depends where you are in your relationship with them.
Or we may come across people, can we honestly say that we love somebody who we don't know? If you just walk up to someone on the street and they say, I need something, I need money or shoes or whatever, and you just hand it to them because they said, or you notice that they have a need. I don't know if I could say that I love them. And I may not ever see that person again. So yes, I think that it is possible when you are not in relationship with someone.
Yeah, but I wonder as I think about that, because I think I do that a lot of times. It's just, hey, I'm doing this, but I wonder if that is not really being prompted, whether we're conscious of it in that moment, by the love of God. Does my compassion to the person that I don't know, whether I'm conscious of it in that moment, it is because they're created in the image of God. That's someone, we don't just see them as just a random person. We're saddened by their state. But I think in the back of our minds, we do that out of love. That act comes from something beyond ourselves. You know, so even in that moment, we may not be aware, but I think it is out of love of God in our heart that prompts us to give sacrificially in that way. Yeah. I think we've come to an end. This conversation, I'm realizing there's so many, one or two questions would be enough to really unpack. And then I really appreciate everybody sharing what you all have shared. And I really think this is so powerful. I remember growing up as a young man, everything else was outlined to me for what a successful Christian is. And this was the one thing that was never really emphasized. It's assumed. But really, this makes all the difference in terms of how we feel about ourselves, how we relate to people, how we experience God. And this love is what really Jesus says people will know that he is God, that he has come. And so that's why Jesus makes this so powerful. It's why he died. And when that becomes resident or manifest in our communities, in our homes, I think God will send people to where we are. It will be a magnet. It will attract him to us and to our community because his love reigns supreme. And so I want to thank all of you guys for coming on today and for sharing your thoughts. We were blessed. As always, I grew in this conversation, and I pray that everyone that is watching, that you grew together as well. As we prepare to close, this one will be back again next week. We do have just an outro, it's a real brief outro that you can watch as we close our time together today. And so thank you. God bless you. Until next week, until we meet again for another week edition of
Thank you for staying by for Afternoon Intersections. Until next time, may you continue to reflect, apply, and live Christ's words.